Welcome to Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world. Sleepcast is created to help you relax, slow down, and gently drift off to sleep. There's nothing you need to remember and nowhere else you need to be. Simply get comfortable, close your eyes, and allow tonight's quiet story to carry you away. And now, we hand things over to our two hosts for today's episode. Rest well and enjoy.
I want you to picture a highly specific but entirely universal scenario.
Okay, lay it on me.
So it's late at night, maybe you've just finished this grinding 12-hour shift at work, or you're on the final exhausting stretch of a massive road trip.
Right. The white lines on the highway are just sort of blurring together at this point.
Exactly. The highway is dark, you're exhausted, and then glowing like a beacon in the distance, you see it.
The illuminated sign.
The drive-through. So you pull your car off the exit, you roll down your window, and you speak your order into that, that crackling metallic speaker box.
I have the exact sound.
Right. And a few minutes later, you're sitting in the driver's seat, just bathed in the soft, radioactive glow of your car's dashboard.
Best lighting in the world.
It really is. You reach into a warm, slightly translucent paper bag. The smell of salt and hot fry oil completely fills the cabin. You pull out your ultimate guilty pleasure fast food meal, unwrap the foil, and you take that first bite.
It is a total ritual. I mean, for millions of people, that specific sequence of events provides this incredibly visceral sense of comfort.
Totally.
It's just a deeply ingrained part of the modern American experience and, honestly, increasingly the global experience.
Right. We've all been in that front seat. But here's the thing that we want to explore today. When we're sitting there in the dark, eating those perfectly salted fries, we rarely, if ever, actually think about the sheer scale of the machinery required to hand you that paper bag.
Oh, the logistics are staggering.
Fast food is not just a cheap meal, it's a mirror. It reflects a century of shifting American dreams, the radical evolution of our physical infrastructure.
Urban socioeconomics, too.
Yes, and the wild, often unpredictable forces of global capitalism.
Which is exactly why it makes for the perfect subject for our analysis today. We're going to use the chaotic, messy, and genuinely fascinating history of the world's second largest burger chain.
Burger King.
Yep, Burger King. We're using them as our primary lens to understand this massive cultural machine.
So welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to shortcut you to being incredibly well-informed about this hidden world. And to do this, we're pulling from a really fantastic stack of research.
We've got a lot to get through.
We do. We're heavily featuring insights from Adam Chandler's book, Drive-Through Dreams, alongside a highly detailed historical dossier chronicling the actual corporate life of Burger King itself.
And this story is going to take us to some very unexpected places. I mean, we're going to be looking at beta stage cooking technology from the 1950s.
The viral marketing stuff too, right?
Oh, yeah. Digging deep into the psychological tactics of viral marketing and even examining how a simple flame-broiled patty inadvertently triggered severe geopolitical crises on the desks of international diplomats.
It gets wild. But before we can talk about global empires and, international diplomacy, we kind of have to understand the soil in which this whole industry grew.
Right, the foundation.
Yeah, we have to understand the fundamental obsession with efficiency and car culture that allowed the concept of fast food to even exist in the first place.
And surprisingly, if you look at the historical timeline, the story of the modern fast food burger does not start with Burger King.
Right.
It actually doesn't even start with McDonald's.
Wait, really? Where does it start?
It starts all the way back in 1921 with White Castle.
Okay, White Castle in the 20s. That makes sense.
Yeah, White Castle is the undisputed genesis point for the American fast food chain. And to understand why it worked, you have to look at the cultural psychology of the United States in the 1920s.
Which was basically the era of Henry Ford, right?
Exactly. The Model T was rolling off the lines. There was this absolute fervor for the assembly line just sweeping across the entire country.
People were obsessed with mechanization.
Right? The Industrial Revolution had successfully mechanized the factory floor. And the founders of White Castle looked at that and thought, well, why can't we apply that exact same industrial efficiency to the kitchen?
And the level of micromanagement they employed is just staggering when you read the early accounts. They weren't just cooking burgers, they were engineering them.
Literally mapping out the griddle.
Yes. They measured every single inch of the griddle surface. Certain zones were exclusively dedicated to the buns, other zones exclusively for the beef.
And the patties themselves, they weren't formed by hand.
No, they were pressed into these small, perfectly uniform, square shapes.
And the geometry there was highly intentional. A square patty maximizes the surface area on a rectangular griddle.
Meaning zero wasted space.
Exactly. The entire operational goal was absolute exact replication. They engineer a system where a customer could walk into a White Castle in Kansas or Chicago or New York
And get the exact same burger.
the precise, identical burger
Exactly.
cooked in the exact same amount of time.
Okay, I have to push back on this premise for a second. Let's really put ourselves in that era, because today, if you go out to eat and the restaurant feels utterly identical to 1,000 other locations, we complain.
Right, we call it cookie cutter.
Yeah, we say it feels corporate or soulless. We crave artisanal, bespoke, unique experiences. So why was a cookie cutter, heavily mechanized burger the absolute dream for consumers in the 1920s?
It's a crucial distinction in consumer psychology. See, today, we take food safety as a given.
Oh, right.
But in the 1920s, stopping for a quick meal, especially ground beef, was a literal gamble with your health.
Because of the meat packing standards back then.
Yeah, this was the era shortly after Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, which exposed the horrifying, unsanitary conditions of the American meatpacking industry. Ground beef was widely viewed as highly suspect.
Like a repository for butcher scraps.
Exactly, butcher scraps and spoiled meat. Furthermore, there was no robust national FDA regulating every single roadside diner.
So you had literally no idea what you were actually putting in your body.
None. A random diner could be perfectly safe, or it could give you severe food poisoning. So when White Castle introduced this highly systematized model, they weren't selling boredom, they were selling trust.
That is so interesting.
In fact, their original buildings were deliberately designed with white porcelain enamel on the outside and stainless steel on the inside to mimic the sterile aesthetics of a hospital.
A hospital? That's why.
They wanted the customer to see this sparkling, clean, scientifically measured environment. That uniformity was deeply comforting. It meant safety. It meant you were going to be okay.
That really reframes the entire concept of the chain restaurant. It wasn't about suppressing culinary creativity. It was about establishing a baseline of biological safety for the traveling public.
Precisely.
And that need for reliable, on-the-go food absolutely skyrocketed a few decades later, right after World War II.
Right, the post-war era changed the physical geography of the entire nation. The Federal Aid Highway Acts of 1956 is perhaps the most significant catalyst for the fast food industry.
Because of Eisenhower's interstate system.
Yes, driven by President Eisenhower, the United States began pouring billions of dollars into an interstate highway system.
We didn't just lay down asphalt, we fundamentally rearranged the architecture of our society to accommodate the automobile.
We built suburbs, off-ramps. We created a culture where people were suddenly commuting longer distances, taking cross-country road trips.
Just living this largely on-the-go lifestyle.
Exactly. You had millions of Americans spending hours inside their cars, and they needed a way to eat without breaking the momentum of their travel.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the birth of the king. The timeline moves to 1953 down in Jacksonville, Florida. We have two entrepreneurs, Keith G. Kramer and his wife's uncle, Matthew Burns.
And they hear rumors about a revolutionary new restaurant model out on the West Coast.
Right, so they take a trip to San Bernardino, California to see it for themselves, and they visit a small, highly efficient burger stand operated by two brothers named Richard and Maurice McDonald.
The original McDonald brothers.
The actual brothers.
Yeah.
So Kramer and Burns stand in the parking lot, they watch the sheer volume of customers being served at lightning speed, and they just have this epiphany. They want to replicate this in Florida.
But to achieve that incredible speed, they know they need specialized hardware.
Because speed in the kitchen is always bottlenecked by the cooking mechanism, right?
Exactly. You can only flip so many burgers on a flat-top grill by hand. So Kramer and Burns acquire the rights to a brand new, highly experimental piece of cooking equipment called the Insta-Broiler.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of the Insta-Broiler, because when you read the descriptions in the source material, it sounds like an absolute nightmare to operate.
It was an ambitious, if heavily flawed, piece of engineering. The Insta-Broiler was an oven that utilized a wire basket mechanism.
A wire basket for raw beef.
Yeah. The operator would load 12 raw burger patties into this wire basket, and the machine would plunge the basket into the oven, cooking the meat from both the top and the bottom simultaneously.
I mean, the logic makes sense. You cook both sides at once, you cut your cooking time in half, and you completely eliminate the need for a line cook to manually flip the burgers.
And they were so confident in this machine that they built their entire corporate identity around it. They literally called their new restaurant Insta-Burger King.
They even mandated in their early contracts that anyone who bought a franchise from them had to purchase and use this specific Insta-Broiler machine.
Which was a huge mistake because, as with many first-generation technologies, the theory completely outpaced the reality.
It reminds me of buying like an early beta version of a smartphone.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. The concept is completely revolutionary. It changes your paradigm of what a phone can do, but the actual physical hardware is incredibly buggy. The screen freezes, the battery dies in 2 hours, and the phone gets boiling hot in your pocket.
The Insta-Broiler was absolute beta tech. The wire baskets were notoriously unreliable. Because they were constantly expanding and contracting from the extreme heat, the baskets would just jam inside the oven.
Oh, no.
And it gets worse. Animal fat from the 12 cooking patties would drip down, pooling in the bottom of the machine and frequently igniting into massive grease fires.
So the restaurants are just constantly filled with smoke?
Smoke, broken machines, panic. And because the core mechanism of their speed was failing, Insta-Burger King began to falter financially.
The hardware was killing the software, which creates this opening for two guys who would ultimately change the entire trajectory of the company. Enter James McLemore and David Edgerton.
Two franchisees based down in Miami.
Yeah. So by 1954, Insta-Burger King is struggling so badly that McLemore and Edgerton are actually able to step in and buy the entire struggling company.
And their immediate focus was fixing that operational bottleneck. They knew the concept of a fast-broiled burger was sound, but the Insta-Broiler was a total liability.
So they basically stripped it down and engineered a replacement.
Right, they called it the flame broiler.
How was the flame broiler mechanically different? Like, how did they solve the grease fire and the jamming issues?
So instead of a plunging wire basket, the flame broiler utilized a horizontal mechanized chain, essentially a miniature conveyor belt.
Okay, a conveyor belt for burgers.
The raw patties were placed on this metal chain, which slowly carried them over a series of stationary, open gas flames.
So the meat is moving, but the fire is stationary.
Precisely. Because the chain was an open grate, the grease dripped entirely through the mechanism into a safe, designated catch pan below, far away from the open flame.
Which drastically reduces the risk of fire.
Right. It also meant the machine never had to stop to be reloaded. You could just keep placing raw patties on one end of the conveyor belt, and perfectly broiled burgers would continuously drop off the other end.
It provided the rapid, mechanized output they needed, but with significantly higher reliability.
They patched the hardware bug. And to signify this shift, the very first thing they did was drop the word Insta from the corporate name.
It simply became Burger King.
But McLemore and Edgerton didn't just stop at engineering kitchen equipment. They realized that if they wanted to compete with McDonald's on a national level, they couldn't just have a better oven.
They needed a distinct culinary identity.
Which leads to 1957 and the introduction of a menu item that would permanently define the brand's position in the market: the Whopper.
This is such a fascinating pivot in business strategy, because at the time, McDonald's was dominating the landscape with a very specific offering. They sold small, highly uniform, plain hamburgers for 15 cents.
If you went to McDonald's, you got a cheap, quick bite.
Right. So McLemore and Edgerton look at that, and instead of trying to make a 14-cent burger, they go entirely in the opposite direction.
It is a textbook example of market segmentation. They realized that trying to beat McDonald's in a race to the bottom on price was just a losing battle.
The McDonald brothers had already perfected the ultra-cheap model.
Exactly. So Burger King decided to actively target a totally different demographic. They designed a massive quarter-pound beef patty served on a wide 5-inch bun.
They loaded it with mayonnaise, ketchup, fresh lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, sliced onions.
They made it massive, they made it messy, and crucially, they priced it at 37 cents.
That is more than double the price of a standard McDonald's burger at the time.
Which is huge. By establishing that price point, they were sending a clear psychological signal to the consumer.
Yeah.
They were essentially saying, if you want a meager automated snack, go to the competition.
Right.
But if you have a serious appetite, if you want a premium, substantial meal that actually requires 2 hands to hold, you come to Burger King.
It was a massive financial risk to ask a consumer to pay 37 cents for fast food in 1957, but it clearly resonated. And they paired this premium menu item with another major innovation in the fast food space.
Right, they brought the customer inside.
Yeah. Prior to this, most fast food operations were strictly walk-up windows or drive-ins where you ate in your car. Burger King became one of the pioneers of integrating actual physical dining rooms into their restaurant blueprints.
Now, Adam Chandler's research is quick to note that these early dining rooms were not exactly luxurious. We are talking about rigid, bolted-down fiberglass chairs and hard plastic tables.
Oh yeah, very utilitarian. But the paradigm shift was huge.
It transformed the function of the restaurant entirely. It was no longer just a transaction point where you grabbed a bag and drove away.
It became a destination.
Exactly. By offering a climate-controlled space with seating, Burger King made fast food a destination for families. A mother could bring her children, sit at a table, and have a relatively clean, inexpensive sit-down meal.
It blurred the line between the efficiency of a roadside stand and the comfort of a traditional diner.
Yep. So we have the mechanics in place. You have the revolutionary conveyor belt flame broiler, ensuring kitchen efficiency. You have the signature 37-cent Whopper, establishing brand identity.
And the plastic dining rooms expanding the demographic reach. The blueprint is perfect. But the ultimate question for any successful business is, how do you scale it?
Because Macklemore and Edgerton cannot physically oversee 1,000 restaurants across a continent.
Right. To achieve that kind of exponential scale, you have to turn to the franchise model.
Franchising is the absolute engine of the American service economy. You, as the parent company, own the intellectual property. The logos, the recipes, the patented kitchen designs, the operational manuals.
And you sell the right to use that intellectual property to independent operators.
Exactly. The franchisee puts up their own capital to build the building and hire the staff. They take on the primary financial risk of the local operation.
And in exchange for the blueprint to a proven business, they pay the parent company an upfront franchise fee plus an ongoing percentage of their gross monthly sales. A royalty.
It allows a brand to expand across the country using other people's money.
It sounds like a cheat code for capitalism. You just sit in Miami and collect checks while thousands of people build your empire for you.
On paper, yes.
But as the research clearly shows, relying on other people to expand your brand opens you up to an incredible amount of risk. And it forces you to collide with complex, real-world socioeconomic dynamics.
Let's look at the geography of this expansion. Throughout the late 1950s and into the 1960s, Burger King and its competitors built drive-thrus on seemingly every major suburban strip in America.
The initial growth phase was entirely focused on those rapidly expanding car-centric suburbs.
But by the late 1960s, a national ceiling was approaching. The suburban markets were becoming saturated. There were only so many highway exits you could build on.
So to maintain their aggressive growth targets, the fast food conglomerates had to pivot. They had to look inward toward the urban centers.
And this urban shift happens to coincide perfectly with one of the most volatile and transformative periods in modern American history, the Civil Rights era.
The intersection of fast food expansion and inner-city socioeconomics is just profound.
It really is. It requires a deep understanding of what was happening to American cities in the late 1960s. This was the era of intense white flight, where middle-class white populations were leaving urban centers en masse for the newly built suburbs.
Which basically drained the cities of their tax base.
Yes. Furthermore, the very same highway projects that fueled the fast food boom were frequently routed directly through thriving minority neighborhoods, demolishing homes and geographically isolating communities.
It's a brutal historical irony. The asphalt that created the drive-through economy was actively bulldozing the urban grid. You had inner-city neighborhoods that were being hollowed out economically and physically. So how does a suburban burger chain fit into this landscape?
Well, as civil unrest grew, activists, community leaders, and the federal government were desperately looking for mechanisms to inject capital and create a new economic foundation in these urban areas.
And fast food presented itself as a highly visible, viable solution.
Exactly. The Small Business Administration, backed by the federal government, actually began issuing specialized loans specifically to help minority entrepreneurs purchase and open fast food franchises in their own neighborhoods.
From a purely economic standpoint, you can see the logic. If you want to empower a first-time business owner, a fast food franchise is a solid bet. The brand is already nationally recognized. The operational system is just handed to you in a binder.
The raw ingredients are relatively inexpensive to procure. And crucially, the profit margins on fast food are incredibly resilient.
Significantly more resilient than, say, the profit margins of a traditional grocery store, right?
Oh, absolutely. Grocery stores typically operate on a razor-thin margin of 1 or 2%. Fast food restaurants, heavily subsidized by cheap commodities like corn and soy, could offer a much more reliable return on investment for a new entrepreneur.
It provided an accessible entry point for minority business ownership, job creation, and generational wealth building.
But, as Adam Chandler unpacks in Drive-Thru Dreams, this federal push to place fast food franchises in urban centers inadvertently created one of the most heavily debated socioeconomic paradoxes we face today.
Right, the food desert paradox.
Okay.
Walk me through the mechanics of how this happens, because it's not just a coincidence that fast food dominates these neighborhoods.
No, it's the result of shifting economic incentives. As the middle class fled the cities, traditional supermarkets and large grocery chains followed them out to the suburbs, where land was cheaper and profit margins were perceived to be safer.
Which caused a mass exodus.
Right, this mass exodus of grocery stores left urban communities entirely devoid of access to fresh produce, whole grains, and lean meats.
An actual geographic desert for nutrient-dense food.
Exactly. But the fast food franchises, bolstered by those government loans and their higher profit margins, stayed. They proliferated. They filled the vacuum left by the grocery stores.
Wow.
As a result, fast food transitioned from being a fun suburban weekend treat into the primary daily caloric source for millions of lower-income urban residents.
It becomes a political third rail. You look at it from one angle, and it is a vital engine for local entrepreneurship. It provides entry-level jobs for local teenagers, it creates minority wealth, and it offers affordable calories to families stretching a paycheck.
But you look at it from another angle.
Right, and it is a devastating emblem of privation. It is a highly engineered, calorie-dense, nutrient-poor product that contributes directly to a severe public health crisis in marginalized communities.
It is a profound duality. The fast food chain is simultaneously an anchor of the community and a symbol of systemic neglect. It really highlights how corporate franchising doesn't just adapt to a socioeconomic environment, it actively shapes it.
And while the socioeconomic consequences of franchising were reshaping American cities, the actual legal mechanics of franchising were creating a massive existential crisis inside the corporate boardrooms of Burger King.
This brings us to the inherent danger of the franchise model. When you sell the rights to your brand, you are surrendering a significant amount of control.
I always compare the early days of franchising to letting a casual acquaintance borrow your car.
That's a good way to look at it.
You hand over the keys, you give them the manual, and you just hope they drive the speed limit and maybe put some gas in the tank. But eventually you look out the window and you realize this acquaintance isn't just driving your car, they've painted it a different color, they're using it as an unlicensed taxi.
And they're actively at the DMV trying to forge the title so they can legally steal it from you.
Exactly. A very apt analogy for the corporate chaos Burger King endured in the 1970s. When Macklemore and Edgerton first started expanding, their franchise agreements were incredibly loose.
Very loose. They utilized a regional master franchise model. They would sell the exclusive rights to an entire geographic territory, say all of Louisiana or all of Illinois, to a single operator for a flat fee.
Meaning that operator could build as many or as few Burger Kings in that state as they wanted, and Miami had almost zero oversight regarding how those restaurants were run.
The parent company had virtually no mechanisms to enforce quality control. If a regional franchisee wanted to cut costs by using cheaper beef, or if they refused to clean their dining rooms, corporate headquarters was largely powerless to stop them.
But the lack of quality control wasn't even the biggest threat.
No, the biggest threat was the accumulation of sheer size.
The Chart House Rebellion. This is one of the wildest corporate power struggles in the dossier.
Chart House was a franchisee group based in Louisiana, operated by two brothers, William and James Trotter. Because of those loose territorial agreements, the Trotters aggressively bought up the rights to massive swaths of the country.
They just kept building and building.
Restaurant after restaurant, compounding their cash flow. By the 1970s, Chart House controlled over 350 Burger King locations across the United States.
350. They were the largest franchisee by an absolute mile. They were generating so much revenue that the tail essentially started wagging the dog.
The Trotter brothers amassed so much capital and corporate leverage that they actively challenged the authority of the parent company.
This is where it gets crazy.
By this time, Burger King founders Macklemore and Edgerton had sold the parent corporation to the Pillsbury Company, a massive food conglomerate. The Trotters looked at Pillsbury's management, deemed them incompetent, and literally attempted a hostile takeover.
A franchisee tried to buy the entire global brand out from under its corporate owner?
It's unbelievable.
It's like the manager of a local branch of a bank trying to buy the entire international banking conglomerate. So when Pillsbury obviously refused the buyout, what happened?
The relationship completely fractured. It dissolved into a bitter, protracted legal war that paralyzed the brand's growth and severely damaged its public image.
It exposed the fatal flaw in their business model. You desperately need local capital to grow your footprint, but if you allow a single franchisee to gain too much leverage, they can and will hold the parent company hostage.
So how does Burger King stop the bleeding? How do they regain control of their own car? In 1978, Pillsbury took drastic action. They poached a highly respected executive directly from their biggest rival, McDonald's. His name was Donald N. Smith, and he was brought in with a singular mandate: fix the franchise system.
And he initiated a massive, sweeping corporate restructuring plan, ominously titled Operation Phoenix.
Operation Phoenix.
That-
It
yeah.
sounds like a covert CIA wet work program.
It really does, but in reality, it was just a guy with a briefcase rewriting commercial real estate contracts. But those contracts changed the entire trajectory of the American service industry.
Right.
Walk me through the mechanics of Operation Phoenix. How did Smith actually kneecap the power of these massive franchisee groups?
He attacked the problem on three distinct legal and structural fronts. First, he implemented a strict geographic radius rule. Under the new Operation Phoenix contracts, no franchisee was permitted to live more than 1 hour's drive away from the restaurants they owned.
That is brilliant. What is the mechanism behind that? Like, why does the drive time matter?
It eliminates the absentee landlord. If you are a corporate overlord sitting in a boardroom in Louisiana, you don't care if the bathrooms in your Burger King in Ohio are filthy because you never have to see them.
Oh, exactly.
But if you are forced to live within an hour of your restaurant, you are physically tied to that community. You eat there, your neighbors eat there. It forces local accountability and significantly improves the daily operational standards of the restaurant.
Okay, what was the second front?
Exclusivity. Smith explicitly banned Burger King franchisees from operating any other competing restaurant chains.
So no more side hustles.
Exactly. Prior to this, a massive group like Chart House could use the profits generated by selling Whoppers to fund the construction of a rival steakhouse or a competing fast food concept. Smith closed that loophole. If you wanted to be in the Burger King system, your capital and your loyalty had to be 100% dedicated to Burger King.
And the third front, because this is the one that I think truly solidified the modern franchise model.
Real estate control. Before Operation Phoenix, franchisees usually bought their own land and built their own buildings. Smith mandated that moving forward, the Burger King parent corporation would aggressively acquire and own the physical real estate in the actual building.
The parent company would then lease that property back to the franchisee.
Exactly. Corporate owns the dirt.
And the legal mechanism here is devastatingly effective. If a franchisee violates the brand standards, if they serve bad food, if they don't clean the kitchen, or if they try to start a corporate rebellion,
The parent company doesn't have to engage in a 10-year trademark lawsuit. They simply terminate the lease and legally evict the franchisee from the building,
it shifted the balance of power permanently back to Miami.
which is the exact real estate dominance model that allowed McDonald's to conquer the globe.
What blows my mind is that these intense boardroom battles in the 1970s, the Chart House Rebellion, Operation Phoenix, they didn't just save Burger King. They authored the foundational rulebook for the modern American franchise economy. If you look at your local gym chain, the mattress store down the street, the oil change spot, their entire legal and operational architecture is built on the groundwork laid during the fast food burger wars.
It established the legal parameters of how centralized brands interact with decentralized operators. But as the historical dossier clearly demonstrates, even if you perfectly engineer the franchise agreement, the brand can still suffer catastrophic damage if the parent company itself loses its focus.
Which brings us to the most chaotic era of the brand's history, the corporate merry-go-round and the age of extreme marketing. If there is one overarching theme to Burger King in the late 20th century, it is that the brand was tossed around by massive corporate conglomerates like an unwanted hot potato.
The lineage of ownership is genuinely dizzying, and it severely impacted the culture of the company. As we mentioned, founders Macklemore and Edgerton sold to the Pillsbury Company in 1967.
Right.
Pillsbury managed it until 1989, when Pillsbury itself was subjected to a hostile takeover by a British entertainment and hospitality conglomerate called Grand Metropolitan.
A British entertainment company running a Florida-based burger chain. That already sounds like a massive culture clash.
It gets significantly more bizarre. In 1997, Grand Metropolitan executes a massive merger with Guinness, the historic Irish stout producer, to form a new corporate behemoth called Diageo.
And Diageo is primarily focused on alcohol, right?
Yes, Diageo is primarily focused on becoming the world's largest producer of alcoholic beverages.
So let me get this straight. The world's second largest fast food burger chain is now just a minor line item on the balance sheet of a massive global alcohol conglomerate.
Yep.
You can just imagine the executive board meetings in London. How are the global sales of our premium vodkas? Excellent. How are our single malt scotches performing? Fantastic. Wait, who is managing the flame-broiled beef patties in Ohio? Did we forget we owned those?
That hypothetical is terrifyingly close to reality. Our research highlights a period of profound, devastating institutional neglect under Diageo. The parent company's capital and executive attention were entirely focused on integrating massive liquor brands.
So Burger King was treated as an afterthought.
Completely. Store remodels were halted, menu innovation stagnated, national marketing budgets were slashed.
And when the parent company starves the brand of oxygen, the franchisees are the ones who suffocate.
Exactly. Without national marketing support to drive foot traffic, local sales plummeted. The neglect was so severe that it drove some of the most stable, well-established franchisee groups in the country straight into bankruptcy.
Like American.
The most glaring example is American.
Walk me through the American collapse, because this wasn't just some mom-and-pop operator failing.
Far from it. American was one of the largest franchisees in the entire system, operating nearly 400 Burger King locations across multiple states.
400?
But they had aggressively expanded using heavily leveraged debt. When Diageo stopped supporting the brand, American's revenues dropped to the point where they could no longer service their massive debt load.
So they crash.
In 2002, American spectacularly collapsed under $300 million in debt, filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
400 restaurants plunging into bankruptcy is a catastrophic failure of corporate oversight. It degrades the value of the entire brand.
It degraded the value so heavily that Diageo executives essentially threw up their hands, decided hamburgers were a distraction from their alcohol portfolio, and put the company up for sale.
Get rid of it.
In late 2002, an investment consortium led by TPG Capital, Bain Capital, and Goldman Sachs purchased Burger King for $1.5 billion.
Which sounds like a lot of money, but the dossier notes that $1.5 billion was actually $750 million less than Diageo had originally demanded, specifically because the buyers forced the price down after witnessing the massive American bankruptcy.
TPG Capital inherited a deeply wounded giant. The franchisees were broke, morale was non-existent, the physical restaurants looked like aging relics of the 1980s, the menu was stale, and McDonald's was aggressively capturing their market share.
So you are TPG Capital. You just spent $1.5 billion on a broken brand. You don't have the immediate cash or the years of lead time required to knock down and rebuild thousands of physical restaurants. You don't have the time to completely re-engineer the supply chain and invent revolutionary new food products. When a brand is suffering from decades of corporate rot, what is the quickest way to resuscitate it?
You lean heavily into a uniquely American business strategy. You deploy extreme marketing. You engage in what author Adam Chandler aptly describes as hucksterism.
Hucksterism. It is such a wonderfully evocative word. It conjures images of the 19th century carnival barker, the outrageous stunt, the absolute unabashed refusal to be ignored. How did TPG weaponize hucksterism for Burger King?
They hired a relatively small Miami-based advertising agency called Crispin Porter plus Bogusky, or CP plus B, and this agency didn't just film traditional commercials featuring happy families eating hamburgers.
No, they didn't.
They manufactured highly aggressive, deeply subversive cultural fever dreams.
They looked at the brand's dusty history, found an old, standard, Smiling King mascot from the 1970s, and completely deformed it. They created the king.
But not a cartoon. It was an actor wearing a highly detailed, rigid, oversized, genuinely unsettling plastic mask with a frozen smile.
It was so creepy.
The character never spoke a single word. He would just appear silently in deeply strange scenarios. A man would wake up in his own bed, turn over, and the king would be lying next to him, silently offering him a breakfast sandwich.
Or someone would look out their window at night and the king would be standing in the bushes.
It was incredibly creepy. But it was brilliant because it was entirely unignorable. It generated an early form of viral internet traction before the mechanics of viral marketing were truly understood. People were talking about it at the water cooler simply because it was so bizarre.
The CP+B campaigns were a masterclass in utilizing the nascent architecture of the internet. The King campaign was just the beginning. They followed it up with a digital campaign called the Subservient Chicken.
Oh man, I vividly remember this. This was a cultural phenomenon. It was a website. And when you went to it, it looked like a grainy webcam feed of a normal living room. Standing in the middle of the room was a guy in a very cheap, very disturbing chicken suit.
And there was a simple text box at the bottom of the screen.
The premise was built entirely around the illusion of interactive control. You could type any command into that text box, do jumping jacks, watch TV, dance, and instantly the video feed would show the chicken performing the exact action you requested.
It felt like magic at the time. It was designed to promote their new tender, crisp chicken sandwich, brilliantly modernizing their old 1970s slogan, "Have it your way." Millions of people spent hours trying to find the limits of what the chicken would do.
Mechanically, it was just a massive library of pre-recorded video clips indexed to specific keywords, but the user experience was incredibly sticky. And CP+B pushed this envelope even further, expanding from viral websites into the actual video game industry.
This is the part that truly showcases the absolute huckster brilliance of the era. They didn't just make a little web game. They developed 3 actual, physical, fully playable video games for the Microsoft Xbox 360 console.
With the creepy king sneaking around on stealth missions or racing bumper cars.
The distribution mechanism was the key. They didn't sell them in video game stores. They sold them exclusively at the fast food counter. You could buy an Xbox game for $4 with the purchase of a value meal.
And the volume they moved is staggering. The dossier confirms they sold 3.2 million copies of these advert games.
3.2 million.
They were literally some of the top-selling Xbox games of the year, sitting on the charts right next to massive multi-million-dollar blockbuster titles like Gears of War and Halo. People were going to Burger King just to buy a cheap video game. It was a massive success.
But hucksterism is a high-wire act, right? Fast food history is littered with marketing stunts that failed spectacularly.
Absolutely. If you look back to the 1980s, Burger King attempted a massive stunt campaign called Where's Herb?
Oh, I've heard of this one.
The premise was that there was a man named Herb, and he was the only person in the entire country who had never tasted a Burger King burger. The company spent tens of millions of dollars on ads, urging the public to spot Herb in their local restaurants, promising a cash reward.
It sounds like a fun scavenger hunt on paper. Why did it fail?
Because the mechanics of the promotion were fundamentally flawed. Nobody knew what Herb actually looked like until deep into the campaign, making the hunt impossible.
So that's a huge oversight.
The commercials were cryptic and confusing, and most importantly, the eventual reveal, a bald man in thick glasses and ill-fitting clothes offered absolutely zero satisfying payoff for the consumer. It didn't make anyone crave a hamburger. It just irritated them. It was a massive financial disaster.
Which goes to show that hucksterism only works if there is actual consumer desire behind it. In fact, Adam Chandler points out that some of the greatest fast food hucksterism doesn't even come from the advertising agencies. It comes directly from the consumers themselves.
That's very true.
I know the dossier focuses on Burger King, but Chandler tells this incredible story about Taco Bell that perfectly encapsulates the absolute lunacy and passion of the fast food consumer.
The story of the Doritos Locos Tacos. It is a wildly entertaining yet ultimately tragic narrative that highlights the modern dynamic between corporations and social media.
Walk me through the timeline on that, because the way this product came into existence is fascinating.
It begins with a remarkably average consumer. A man is sitting on his couch, eating standard Taco Bell, and a commercial for Doritos chips airs on his television. In that moment, he has a spontaneous culinary epiphany. He thinks, why hasn't anyone made a taco shell entirely out of nacho cheese Doritos?
It's the most obvious, brilliant fast food combination ever conceived.
He was so convinced of its brilliance that he actually called the corporate offices of Frito-Lay to pitch the idea. They, predictably, dismissed him.
Naturally.
But he didn't stop. He turned to the digital tools of the era. He created a dedicated Facebook group He used Photoshop to digitally insert images of his imagined Doritos Locos Tacos into famous historical photographs and iconic movie scenes.
He relentlessly bombarded Taco Bell's social media accounts.
He willed the product into existence through sheer digital annoyance.
He generated such a massive organic grassroots following that Taco Bell corporate finally took notice. And the irony is, Taco Bell's internal R&D team had actually conceptualized a Dorito shell nearly 2 decades earlier, but the project had died in committee due to internal corporate bickering and manufacturing challenges.
But this consumer's viral campaign definitively proved the market demand existed.
So they invite him into the fold, they figure out the manufacturing, they prepare for the biggest product launch in the company's history.
And then, tragically, the creator of the viral campaign passed away from a sudden illness just weeks before the nationwide launch.
Oh, wow, that is tragic.
But the emotional connection his community had built around this product was so strong that following his funeral, his friends and family actually organized a procession to their local Taco Bell to eat the Doritos Locos Tacos in his honor.
It is a profoundly American story. It touches on grassroots innovation, the power of digital communities, the absolute absurdity of the product itself, and the deep, genuine emotional connection people form with these brands.
It perfectly illustrates why hucksterism works. Fast food is inherently slightly ridiculous, and when a brand or a consumer embraces that ridiculousness, it creates cultural resonance.
But let's bring this back to Burger King and the creepy mask and the subservient chicken. Let's synthesize this. When we look at those wild viral ad campaigns from the 2000s, were they actually fixing the fundamental problems at Burger King, or were they just putting a really weird plastic mask over a broken corporate structure?
Analytically speaking, it was primarily a mask. As we established, when a corporation suffers from years of financial neglect, their product innovation pipeline dries up. They don't have the capital to design vastly superior kitchen layouts or source revolutionary new ingredients.
When the core product stalls, the marketing has to become the product.
The sizzle completely replaces the steak. The CP plus B campaigns were brilliantly effective, but they are highly targeted. They focused almost entirely on the 18 to 34-year-old male demographic.
Which makes sense.
This group is the most likely to consume massive, calorie-dense burgers multiple times a week, and they are the most receptive to subversive, edgy internet humor. The campaign successfully created a temporary surge in cultural relevance and a localized spike in sales among that specific cohort.
But it masked the deeper systemic operational issues. The physical restaurants themselves were still aging and uninviting. The menu, outside of the giant meat-heavy burgers, was incredibly weak. They were alienating families, they were alienating health-conscious consumers, and they were alienating women.
Which is why, in 2010, the corporate merry-go-round spun once again. TPG Capital decided they had squeezed as much value out of the brand as they could, and they sold Burger King to 3G Capital, a massive, highly disciplined Brazilian investment firm, for $3.26 billion.
And 3G Capital is not interested in weird plastic masks or chicken suits.
Not at all. 3G Capital is renowned for ruthless operational efficiency. They immediately did the hard, unglamorous work. They fired the edgy advertising agency. They formally retired the creepy king mascot.
They aggressively restructured the corporate headquarters to cut costs.
And they forced the franchisees to actually remodel the physical restaurants. They broadened the menu, adding salads, smoothies, and coffee to try and win back the families and the broader demographic that the hucksterism had alienated.
They shifted the focus back to the fundamental mechanics of running a restaurant. But as 3G Capital would rapidly discover, fixing the domestic menu and remodeling the domestic dining rooms is only half the battle. Because Burger King is not just an American company, it is a sprawling global empire.
And when you operate on an international scale, you don't just deal with competitors like McDonald's. You collide with international law, trademark disputes, and high-stakes geopolitics.
Expanding a brand across sovereign borders is an incredibly complex endeavor, and it often begins with the surprisingly absurd realities of international trademark law.
Yes. Let's talk about naming rights, because the labyrinth of trademark law has created some of the funniest anomalies in the fast food world.
It happens frequently. A massive global corporation decides to expand into a new territory, only to discover that their internationally recognized name is already legally owned by a tiny, independent operator.
The Matin, Illinois situation is a perfect example of this. You have this massive billion-dollar corporation based in Miami, and they are legally forbidden from opening a restaurant within a 20-mile radius of this one specific random town in central Illinois.
Why? Because a mom-and-pop diner there had already registered the name Burger King locally. A federal judge ruled that the giant corporation could not infringe on the local diner's territory.
But the absolute best example of trademark chaos is what happened in Australia.
Australia is a fascinating case study in international franchising. In 1971, Burger King Corporation was prepared to launch an aggressive expansion into the Australian market. They secured an ambitious local master franchisee named Jack Cowan.
They finalized the real estate, they shipped the flame broilers, and then they went to officially register the trademark.
And they hit a brick wall.
They discovered that a small, independent takeaway food shop in the city of Adelaide had already registered the trademark for Burger King. The global corporation was legally blocked from using its own name on an entire continent.
So what is the protocol when that happens? Do you buy them out? Do you change your corporate identity?
In this instance, the corporate executives at Pillsbury, who owned the brand at the time, employed a very pragmatic solution. They simply went to a filing cabinet, pulled out a list of random, unused trademarks they had acquired over the years from various corporate mergers, and handed the list to Jack Cowan.
They essentially said, pick one.
And Cowan looks down the list. He sees a trademark for a pancake mix brand called Hungry Jack. He likes the sound of it, decides to add a possessive "is" to the end, and boom, Hungry Jack's is born.
And it remains that way to this day. If you travel to Australia, you will see restaurants with the exact same bun halves logo, utilizing the exact same flame broiler technology, selling the exact same Whopper sandwich. But the signs all read Hungry Jack's.
It is a massive, continent-wide brand identity born entirely out of a localized legal technicality.
It's a hilarious quirk of global expansion. But as we move into the 2010s, Burger King's international corporate maneuvering led to political scrutiny that was far from funny. Now, before we dive into this next topic, I want to reiterate to you listening that we are looking at this strictly through the lens of international corporate strategy and financial mechanics.
Right.
We are impartially reporting the historical facts from our research. We are not taking any political stance on corporate taxation, ethics, or international policy.
Agreed. Looking purely at the financial mechanics, in 2014, under the ownership of 3G Capital and backed by funding from billionaire investor Warren Buffett, Burger King announced a massive acquisition. They were purchasing the beloved Canadian coffee and donut chain Tim Hortons.
The two brands would merge to form a massive new multinational parent company called Restaurant Brands International.
On paper, it sounds like a standard corporate merger. You combine a burger chain and a coffee chain to dominate different day parts. But this specific merger ignited a massive, fiery political uproar in the United States. Politicians from both sides of the aisle were furious.
Why?
Because the merger was structured around a highly controversial financial maneuver known as a tax inversion.
Walk me through the mathematical mechanics of a tax inversion. Like, how does a company actually execute this?
A tax inversion is essentially a strategic restructuring of a company's corporate citizenship. The United States historically had one of the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. If an American company merges with a foreign company, they can legally move their new global headquarters to the foreign country, in this case Canada, which possess a significantly more favorable corporate tax structure.
So even though thousands of Burger King restaurants are still physically operating in America, flipping burgers and making money, the parent company legally resides in Canada, drastically reducing the amount of corporate taxes they pay to the U.S. government.
Precisely. The physical operations barely change, but the paper headquarters moves and the tax burden shifts dramatically. The U.S. political establishment viewed this as a deliberate exploitation of a loophole, resulting in a massive loss of American tax revenue and a betrayal of the country where the brand was founded and built its wealth.
The backlash was intense. People were calling for boycotts, accusing the company of corporate desertion.
The company, conversely, maintained that the move was not primarily about taxes, but was a strategic necessity to facilitate aggressive global growth for both brands under a unified international holding company.
It placed a fast food hamburger right in the crosshairs of a national debate over globalization and tax loopholes. But incredibly, a tax inversion controversy is relatively mild compared to what happens when a fast food franchise model physically intersects with a literal geopolitical conflict zone.
And again, we must stress to the listener that we are maintaining absolute neutrality. We are not evaluating international borders, territorial disputes, or the complex politics of the Middle East. Our focus is entirely on the legal constraints and vulnerabilities of the master franchise system.
Understood. Let's examine the mechanics of what happened with Burger King in the Middle East. Burger King Corporation signs a master franchise agreement allowing a local operator to develop and open restaurants within Israel.
That Israeli master franchisee subsequently makes a real estate decision to open a new Burger King location in a place called Male Adumim.
And what is the geographic significance of Male Adumim?
Male Adumim is an Israeli settlement located within the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territories in the West Bank. The legality of these settlements under international law is the subject of intense, ongoing, and highly volatile global dispute.
So a local businessman decides to open a burger joint in a newly built commercial center in this highly contested area. And almost instantaneously, a fast food restaurant becomes an international diplomatic incident.
It escalated with astonishing speed. Muslim and Jewish advocacy groups across multiple continents immediately mobilized. The controversy surrounding this single restaurant location grew so intense that it was formally addressed by the Arab League, a powerful political coalition comprising 22 Arab nations.
And the Arab League didn't just issue a press release expressing disappointment. They issued a direct existential threat to the corporation.
The Islamic countries within the League issued a formal ultimatum to Burger King Corporation headquarters in Miami. They stated unequivocally that if the location in the contested settlement was not immediately closed, the League would enact severe economic and legal sanctions.
What kind of sanctions?
Specifically, they threatened the outright revocation of Burger King's business licenses across all 22 member states.
They threatened to completely eradicate the brand from the entire Middle East over the real estate decision of one single franchisee.
Burger King Corporation was caught completely flat-footed. They publicly claimed that the local Israeli franchisee had breached their contract by opening the location without corporate approval, and they initiated a frantic legal battle to force the franchisee to shut the restaurant down to appease the Arab League.
It perfectly illustrates the terrifying fragility of global expansion. You hand the keys to your brand to a local operator thousands of miles away, they sign a commercial lease, and suddenly, executives in Miami are desperately trying to navigate international sanctions and geopolitical warfare.
It's a nightmare scenario.
And we saw this exact same structural nightmare, the inability of the parent company to control its foreign operators, play out again recently on an even larger scale in Russia.
We did. And once more, maintaining strict neutrality regarding the military conflict itself, we must look at the legal mechanics of the corporate response. Following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was immense immediate global pressure from the public and governments for Western corporations to halt all operations in Russia and divest from the country entirely.
And many major corporations did exactly that. They took massive financial write-downs, closed their factories, and left. But Burger King appeared to be dragging its feet.
They issued a statement saying they were suspending corporate support, halting all new marketing, and pausing any future expansion in the region.
But the 800-plus existing Burger King restaurants in Russia remained open for business, serving customers every day. The public was outraged. Why didn't the CEO in Miami simply flip a switch, revoke the licenses, and order the grills in Moscow turned off?
Because, legally and mechanically, that switch does not exist. This is the ultimate paralyzing danger of the master franchise system. Burger King Corporation in Miami does not actually own those 800 restaurants in Russia.
They don't own the buildings, they don't own the grills.
And they do not employ the thousands of Russian workers. The entire network is fully managed and operated by a local independent master franchisee who holds an ironclad, multi-decade contract.
And it wasn't just a standard contract with a local businessman, was it? The corporate structure was deeply entangled with the state.
Investigative journalism into the corporate structure revealed a labyrinth of international finance. Burger King Corporation retained a stake in the Russian operations through a highly complex offshore joint venture.
A joint venture that included a major partnership with VTB Bank.
Precisely. VTB Bank is a massive financial institution that is majority owned by the Russian state itself, an entity that was heavily targeted by international financial sanctions.
So, when you lock yourself into an airtight, legally binding international franchise agreement, partnering with entities backed by a foreign state, there is no off switch. The parent company cannot legally force the independent operator to lock their doors, abandon their real estate, and fire their employees overnight, regardless of the immense political pressure or moral outcry back in the United States.
If the local master franchisee refuses to close, which they did, citing their own legal right to continue operating their business, the parent company is virtually powerless to stop them without engaging in years of complex international arbitration.
It is the chart house rebellion from the 1970s, but amplified by the staggering complexities of international law, banking sanctions, and military conflict.
It is a profound structural vulnerability.
So the brand manages to survive the franchise wars, the dizzying corporate merry-go-round, the bizarre huckster marketing stunts, and international diplomatic crises. But as we move into the modern era, they face an entirely different kind of existential threat. Section 5 of our research delves into a fascinating cultural shift, the paradox of stealth health and modern missteps.
The landscape of food consumption and consumer expectations has shifted dramatically in the 21st century. The modern consumer is vastly more educated about nutrition, more connected via social media, and more vocally demanding than any previous generation.
This shift really accelerated in the early 2000s. You had massive cultural touchstones like the documentary Super Size Me and Eric Schlosser's book Fast Food Nation. They essentially pulled back the curtain on the industrial food complex. Suddenly, there was a massive mainstream push for health, wellness, and transparency. Fast food was heavily vilified as the primary culprit behind the national obesity epidemic.
The industry recognized that the cultural optics of their food needed to change rapidly. You saw brands panic. Kentucky Fried Chicken formally dropped the word fried from their marketing and legally rebranded as KFC, attempting to distance themselves from the negative connotations of fried food.
Burger King made aggressive public pledges, promising to remove all artificial preservatives, colors, and flavors from the Whopper by 2020.
They were desperately trying to signal to the market that they were adapting. But as Adam Chandler's research brilliantly points out, there's a massive, highly hypocritical gulf between what consumers publicly demand on social media and what they actually purchase at the drive-thru window.
This is where we enter the paradox of stealth health. Let's examine a specific product, the Impossible Whopper. Burger King was actually a significant pioneer in the fast food space by introducing the Impossible Burger on a national scale. It utilizes a highly engineered, plant-based patty designed to mimic the taste and bleeding texture of beef.
When it launched, it was hailed as a massive cultural victory for vegetarians, vegans, and the environmental movement.
And from a strictly ecological standpoint, the shift toward plant-based alternatives is indeed significant. The manufacturing of plant-based patties requires substantially less land, utilizes less water, and produces a fraction of the greenhouse gas emissions compared to industrial cattle farming.
But Chandler is quick to point out the paradox. From a pure nutritional and caloric standpoint, the Impossible Burger is highly processed.
Let's break down the mechanics of the sandwich itself. The patty is grown in a lab using genetically modified ingredients to create heme, the molecule that makes it taste like meat. And crucially, once you take that plant-based patty and you put it on a massive white flour bun and you slather it with mayonnaise, cheese, and sugary ketchup, it contains virtually the exact same amount of calories and fat as a regular beef Whopper.
Chandler literally refers to this phenomenon as smoke and mirrors for health. If your primary motivation for eating it is to reduce your carbon footprint or abstain from animal products, it is a valid choice. But if you are consuming it under the illusion that you are eating a healthy, weight-loss-friendly meal, you are deceiving yourself.
This is why the industry often relies on stealth, health incremental, almost imperceptible changes rather than radical menu overhauls. Sonic, the drive-in chain, tried a fascinating experiment with this approach. They introduced the blended burger.
The mechanical concept behind the blended burger was to subtly alter the composition of the patty itself. Instead of a 100% beef patty, they engineered a blend that was 75% ground beef and 25% finely minced mushrooms.
The genius of it is that mushrooms naturally contain umami, which mimics the savory flavor of beef. When you grill it, it tastes almost identical to a regular hamburger. But by replacing a quarter of the meat with fungi, you subtly reduce the total calories, the saturated fat, and the ecological impact without shocking the consumer's palate.
It is a gentle nudge toward sustainability rather than a radical demand for behavioral change. Because ultimately we have to ask the core question, does the American public actually want fast food to be healthy?
Chandler includes an amazing anecdote in his book that answers this question perfectly. He tells a story about Michael Pollan. For context, Michael Pollan is an incredibly famous author and essentially the high priest of the modern organic Whole Foods farm-to-table movement. He's the guy who famously said, "Eat food, not too much, mostly plants."
He advocates for a complete rejection of the industrial food system.
Right. So Pollan poses a hypothetical question to his most dedicated followers, an audience of people who care deeply, passionately about healthy, sustainable eating. He asks them, how would you feel if you woke up tomorrow and McDonald's had completely transformed? What if every single ingredient was 100% organic, non-GMO, locally sourced, with zero high fructose corn syrup?
And the response from this highly health-conscious audience was incredibly revealing. They admitted that they would be disappointed.
Disappointed. Why? Because making fast food perfectly healthy and nutritious is like trying to make a roller coaster perfectly safe by forcing the cars to travel at 5 miles per hour. Sure, you eliminate the risk, but you completely defeat the psychological purpose of the ride.
It is a profound insight into consumer psychology. There's a deeply ingrained emotional component to the consumption of fast food. We inherently view it as an indulgence. It is a designated cheat day. It is a guilty pleasure designed to provide a rapid hit of dopamine.
If you remove the grease, the salt, and the guilt, you remove a fundamental part of the pleasure.
Consumers loudly demand that corporations act responsibly and offer healthy options. But when they pull up to the speaker box, they vote with their wallets for salt, fat, and sugar.
This massive gap between stated moral values and actual consumer behavior creates an absolute minefield for modern fast food PR and marketing teams. They are desperately trying to navigate a digital landscape where consumers demand both edgy, viral humor and strict, unwavering moral purity. And when you try to walk that line, sometimes you step right on a landmine.
The modern PR missteps are fascinating to analyze because they usually stem from a brand completely misreading the current cultural context. Let's examine the disastrous incident that occurred on International Women's Day in 2021.
Oh, this was a legendary disaster.
Uh,
On International Women's Day, the official Burger King UK Twitter account sent out a tweet that contained a single highly inflammatory sentence, "Women belong in the kitchen."
Now, if we look at the mechanical intent behind the tweet, it was designed to be the provocative first line of a multi-part Twitter thread. The subsequent tweets in the thread highlighted a genuine problem, the severe lack of female representation in executive chef roles within the restaurant industry.
The thread concluded by announcing a brand new, fully funded culinary scholarship program specifically designed to empower female employees.
The intent was to use a shocking, sexist 1950s trope as a rhetorical hook to draw attention to a positive, empowering message.
But the execution fundamentally misunderstood the mechanics of the platform. It's Twitter. The vast majority of users do not click through to read the nuanced context of a multi-part thread.
All the internet saw was the official account of the world's second-largest burger chain tweeting a wildly sexist statement on a day dedicated to women's equality. The algorithm stripped the context, and the internet exploded.
The brand was trending globally for all the wrong reasons. Thousands of users were furious. Dozens of major news publications immediately ran hit pieces. Within 12 hours, Burger King was forced to delete the tweet and issue a massive, groveling public apology.
Analytically, it demonstrates the lethal danger of attempting to apply the subversive, edgy hucksterism of the 2000s, the era of the creepy king and the subservient chicken, to the highly literal, highly reactive social media landscape of the 2020s. The modern digital consumer leaves zero room for highly nuanced, provocative irony from a corporate entity.
People interpret corporate messaging incredibly literally now, and this shift toward absolute literalism isn't just happening on Twitter. Consumers are taking this literalism directly into federal court. The dossier details some truly bizarre modern lawsuits that highlight this trend. For example, a strict vegan in Atlanta filed a lawsuit against Burger King regarding the Impossible Whopper.
The plaintiff argued that because the plant-based Impossible patties were cooked on the exact same mechanized flame broiler chain as the regular beef Whoppers, they were contaminated by meat byproducts.
They felt they had been deceived into consuming animal fat.
That specific case was ultimately dismissed by the judge, who noted that Burger King had never explicitly advertised the product as strictly vegan, but rather as a plant-based alternative. However, it vividly highlights the growing legal vulnerability of trying to mass-produce a product that pleases every highly specific consumer demand.
But the most revealing lawsuit is the ongoing class action case regarding the physical dimensions of the Whopper itself. In 2022, a massive lawsuit was filed alleging that Burger King engages in false advertising. The plaintiffs claim that the Whopper depicted in the television commercials and on the illuminated menu boards appears approximately 35% larger than the actual physical burger the customer receives in the drive-through bag.
And surprisingly, a federal judge actually refused to dismiss the case, allowing it to proceed to trial. The judge stated that the plaintiff's claims might reasonably suggest that a standard consumer was materially misled by the marketing imagery.
Burger King's legal defense is rooted in industry precedent. They argue that no reasonable consumer expects the food in a highly stylized commercial to look exactly like the real thing, noting that food styling using tweezers to place sesame seeds or propping up the bun with hidden toothpicks is a standard, universally accepted advertising practice.
It is the ultimate showdown between literalism and hucksterism. For 70 years, the American public implicitly agreed to the huckster's bargain. We all knew the burger in the commercial was painted with shoe polish to look shiny, and the grill marks were burned on with a soldering iron. We knew it wouldn't look like that when we unwrapped the foil in the car.
But today's consumer is rejecting that bargain. They are saying, no, I want exactly what is in the picture, down to the millimeter, and if I don't get it, I will sue you in federal court. The societal tolerance for the carnival barker has almost completely vanished.
It forces the fast food industry into a highly rigid, highly sanitized corner. The corporate executives in Miami must now attempt to balance the historic, foundational demand for cheap, indulgent, uniform food with modern demands for ecological sustainability, flawless public relations, and absolute, literal truth in advertising.
Which seems like a nearly impossible tightrope to walk.
But walk it they must, because the economic machinery, the global franchise system, never stops running.
And that brings us to the end of our historical journey today. Let's zoom out and synthesize what we've unpacked in this deep dive.
We began in the 1950s looking at a clunky, dangerous wire basket called an Insta-broiler that could clumsily cook 12 patties at a time. And over the course of 70 years, through the mechanical invention of the flame broiler and the strategic pricing of the Whopper, we watched that single operational idea evolve into a multi-billion-dollar global empire.
We explored the mechanics of franchising, how lending the blueprints of your brand to thousands of independent operators literally reshaped the physical and socioeconomic geography of American cities, creating wealth while simultaneously birthing the food desert paradox. We traced the wild corporate lineage from Pillsbury to the bizarre era of Diageo, and analyzed how institutional neglect forced a brand to rely on the most surreal, viral huckster marketing of the 21st century just to survive.
We examined the severe, paralyzing geopolitical limitations of the master franchise system in contested regions like Israel and Russia, proving that multinational corporations cannot simply dictate terms to sovereign nations or state-backed banks. And finally, we dissected the modern paradox of stealth health, where consumers loudly demand nutritional progress but ultimately crave a guilty indulgence, punishing brands that try to be too clever or too literal.
So, why does all of this deeply layered history matter to you? Because the next time you pull into a drive-through lane, speak into that crackling speaker box, and wait for that paper bag to be handed through your window, you are doing much more than just ordering a quick dinner. You are actively participating in a 70-year-old ongoing experiment in American capitalism, urban planning, and global economics. Every bite of that burger is heavily seasoned with history.
It is a remarkable legacy. But as we look toward the horizon, our source material offers one final, genuinely fascinating point of speculation about where this machinery goes next. Early in our discussion, we analyzed how the construction of the 1950s interstate highway system literally birthed the fast food drive-thru.
Yeah.
The physical architecture of the restaurant was designed entirely to serve the automobile.
Right. The car dictated the building. But today, the automobile and our fundamental relationship to it is on the precipice of another massive change.
We are already seeing the initial phases of this shift. Third-party delivery applications like DoorDash and Uber Eats are fundamentally altering the operational mechanics of the restaurant. Fast food brands are actively building new store models, such as Burger King's recent Sizzle redesign, that drastically shrink the dining rooms and prioritize multiple specialized drive-through lanes specifically designed for mobile order pickups and gig economy delivery drivers.
They're turning the restaurants into high-efficiency logistical hubs. But let's extrapolate that further. What happens when the underlying technology of the car changes entirely?
That is the profound question regarding the future architecture of our cities and our food supply. If we are moving toward a future where fully autonomous self-driving vehicles become the standard mode of transportation, How will that completely reshape the physical concept of the drive-through window?
It is wild to visualize. If you are commuting home, sitting in the back of a fully autonomous pod, perhaps watching a movie or taking a nap while the car drives itself, you are not going to want to interrupt your commute to roll down a window and shout your order into a speaker box.
The entire transaction must be digitized and automated. Does the traditional drive-through lane simply become a highly precise docking station for driverless delivery drones?
Or, to take it to the absolute extreme, if you don't actually have to drive the car, does the restaurant eventually just drive to you?
A mobile, fully automated autonomous kitchen utilizing next-generation robotic flame broilers, navigating the city streets and cooking a Whopper perfectly to order while it drives directly to your front door. It sounds like science fiction, but structurally, it is merely the ultimate logical evolution of the on-the-go lifestyle that birthed the industry a century ago.
It's an incredible evolution to ponder the next time you are sitting in the dark, bathed in the soft, radioactive glow of your dashboard, reaching into that warm paper bag for a perfectly salted fry. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden machinery of the fast food empire. We'll catch you next time.
And that brings another quiet episode of Sleepcast to an end. Thank you for spending this time with us. We hope our two hosts helped you relax, slow your thoughts, and perhaps drift gently off to sleep. New episodes of Sleepcast are released every day, 7 days a week, all year round. Follow Sleepcast on the podcast app you are using now, so new episodes are added automatically, and you can be notified whenever another wonderfully boring story is released. Until next time, sleep peacefully and good night. Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world.